One was pulling a machine gun cart with supplies on it, and the other one was either an officer or a non-commissioned officer. So I took my M1 rifle and waited till it got real close, and I shot the pulling the machine gun cart because he had a rifle on his shoulder. I figured I better kill him first because I didn't want to get in a firefight. And I shot him in the head and he dropped dead. The Japanese officer, for a second or two, stood there for a minute and trying to get his scabbard out and started rushing towards me. And I didn't want to take a chance of missing him if I tried to shoot him in the head. So I shot two bullets in his stomach. We went out and went out there and got in the line because you had to have a perfect line. And what they would do, the first wave would drop us off, and then they had to go out and pick up the next wave, and those guys were getting off of the transports. They were in boats or barges, and then they'd have to climb from there into the amphibious tanks and then go over the reef. And that's how they got the Marines in. So it was slow getting the second wave in. And we were on the beach, just being pounded. Guys were getting shot up. And the operative of our tank said, look, there's a machine gun nest just to the right of us. He said, and this particular tank only had a little room for us. There were only several of us because they had a 75 millimeter cannon on the front. And he said, I'll try to blast that out of there. And but we couldn't move because the whole beach was being covered by all of this. I never realized till I went back to see. You could see the whole beach where the 1st Regiment was landing. And we were really being pounded. And if you didn't stay in that little hole, he gave us, he said, I can give you 30 seconds or a minute to dig your holes and get under cover. He said, then I got to back up. And I looked, and there was 3 bodies in the water. And I realized that from their uniforms and everything, one of them was a kid that we told him to stick with us. And we came out of the tank, and we immediately jumped off the side. You don't go down the ramp, that's too many steps. So we jump off to the side, and I think that these fellows not having that went down the ramp the whole distance, then made their turn. But there were 3 of them laying dead in the water, their bodies. And I could see this young kid, he was facing up, and the others were dead, but they were killed immediately. And so the tank operator said he was going to back out, and I kept doing this, and you could, with the noise and everything, they kind of understand. I kept doing this, and he looked back there, and there were these 3 bodies in the water. So he angled his tank and backed out. Otherwise, he'd have gone over them. But you couldn't move hardly a finger or anything. Finally, John LaCroix went to turn over, and his hand up in the air, and he got a bullet right through his hand. And John said, bend my hand for me. I said, well, I'm going to try to set up a machine gun. I pushed away some of the sand, and so I'd have a path to fire. And he got a little irritated. What do you mean you're not going to back up my hand? I said, you can patch up your own. I said, you can still stick here. You still got one good hand. And he and I had a little argument. and I said, well, if you want to go aboard a hospital ship, the next tank comes in, get aboard it. I said, you can join us later on. But I was hoping he'd say, yeah, I'll stick around. But so I was left without anybody as assistant gunner. So the sergeant says, come on, we got to get up out of here. He said, this artillery will kill us all if we don't get up out of here. So we I had to take the whole machine gun. It was an air-cooled machine gun. I had to take the tripod and the barrel and everything and drag that. And I was one of the first ones up, and all of a sudden they were rushing ahead of me. And then a big barrage hit on this draw. Several guys were killed. You had to just go by them. You couldn't stop. And we got beyond it, we got up near the airfield, and I had no ammunition, no belts or anything. So I get up there, and then Bill Holman, a good friend of mine, he said, "Frank, you need an assistant gunner. I'll be your assistant." I said, "Yeah." So I said, "The first thing, Bill, we got to get some ammunition." So Bill went running down the beach, and not the beach, along this airfield where we just stopped. And there was a couple of belts there. Someone had got shot or something and dropped them, or too heavy. He brought them back, so we had 2 belts of ammunition. And we no more got settled in a very short time, and we're on a little ridge like this, and the airfield sort of ended, and then there was a drop. And so our bodies were at an angle, and we could stick our heads up, and we set the machine gun up. Then somebody hauled tanks, and we looked out. There were about a dozen tanks running across the airfield, hell-bent for election. And so we were firing it. There was one coming right at us, and we kept firing. And I was trying to knock off a track, and didn't quite work. And then I concentrated on the superstructure, thinking there's got to be some opening that the tank drivers hoping to hit that. Didn't happen. So I kept firing at the treads. Well, he was coming right at us. So Bill Holman said, "Frank, why don't we roll out of the way just before the tank gets within 15 or 20 feet of us?" And we did. We rolled out of the way. The tank came right at the machine gun and crushed it. And then it got stuck down in the gully behind us, and opened up the cover of the tank, and I guess they were going to try to get out. And this one Marine had dashed up on the side, and he tossed in a hand grenade, and so it killed any occupants who were inside. We thought it might blow. But on the outside, there was a barrel tied to it, like a 55-gallon drum, and there was a in there. You could see the was dead. He had got fired on. And so they wanted some infantry, apparently, to get to the beach once they got, and they were very short distance, from where we were at the airfield. They only had to go several hundred feet, maybe 1,000 feet, and they'd be at the beach and could have raised hell. But they stopped all of the tanks, and there was a bazooka operator next to us. I don't know who he was, and he had a loader, and the 2 of them, they knocked out 2 tanks, and we were yelling at him to fire at the tank that was coming at us, and he fired at it a couple times, but he missed it. And so that tank got through our lines, but he got stuck in this gully about 30, 40 feet from us, and knocked that out. I understand that tank was there for years. It's not there now because I went down that area. And anyway, that calmed things down, and I guess I didn't see them, but there were a lot of infantry going to follow them, started following them from the other side of the airfield. And then they retreated back when the tanks were knocked out. Their one, you might call it a banzai charge. They were going to make one desperate charge behind the tanks. When the tanks they pulled back all those Japanese. So we stayed there that night, and we thought maybe the Japanese might come through. And they did a few areas that we heard some shooting, but it was rather overall quiet. First thing in the morning, they told us we had to cross the airfield, and that we wouldn't be able to run because you wouldn't make it. You'd be out of gas if you tried to run the whole distance. So we had a sort of a fast walk or a trot, and you could see all the Marines, approaching the other side. And as we got close, then we all did jump into, because there were a lot of guys being killed, because the Japanese were firing artillery and everything else as we crossed. We finally got to the other side, and it sort of cleared up. I think we were fairly close to the Japanese anyway. And then, I guess, 15 minutes, they said, well, we've got up that ridge up there, and that was Bloody Nose Ridge, that we were going to attack. So we started through, and we were running through a landmine and I could see these little yellow tops they were like bombs or something, and they must have had them so that they could walk through. But if you were running through, you couldn't spot all these of those. And so I was running, and I was carrying the barrel of the machine gun, and every once in a while I'd take a leap, and I'd find myself going through the air, probably you jumping like a 10 or 12-foot jump or something, and you had to push what it was, that somebody stepped on a mine behind you or somewhere, and you sort of push you along. I did see a Marine carrying a flamethrower, and they used to tell you those things wouldn't burst into flame. And all of a sudden, this guy went up in a ball of flame. Something had hit him, whether it was a hot artillery shell or something. Anyway, he went down, and finally we got across this minefield, completely across it, and we were approaching this Bloody Nose Ridge. And by then, our ranks had thinned out between the beach and the minefield and crossing the airfield. There weren't too many of us left. So we tried to go up this one ridge, and there was so much fire, we had to, back down again. A couple of guys fell off because these were like sharp like this, very difficult to climb. And especially if you're carrying a part of a machine gun, you're sometimes pulling yourself with one hand and hoping your leg wouldn't slip. And so there were a couple of guys, you could see they were falling 30, 40 feet down into the coral ridge. It didn't move. You'd look down and see them not moving. So they got killed just falling off. Maybe they got shot or they slipped. And so we couldn't make it. And so we went back down again, and they decided that they wouldn't do anything till daylight the next day. So the next day we did the same thing. But during the night we had
You guys are assaulting the ridge, right?
The ridge, right. And that night we had an attack by, I don't know, about a dozen Japanese or something came into our line. And this one came at me. He had his bayonet on, and he started, moving this. And I had my M1. I had picked up an M1 rifle that was beside me, and because of a machine gun, you couldn't get it set up or anything. And he came at me, and I had 8 rounds in my M1. So as he came at me, I shot him in the stomach, and he came forward and hesitated and backed up a little bit. He was on a ridge just above me. And then he gathered himself together again. All this is going on in an instant, and took off towards me. So then I had another. See, these people had bolt-action rifles, and once they fired it, they didn't have time to reload and everything. So they loved the bayonets anyway in close quarter. Anyway, I shot him right through the head. And as his rifle came down, it went through the side of my knee, and he fell on top of me because I was below. Blood pouring out of his head, and some got in my mouth and what have you. So I immediately pushed him off, and I knew he was dead. So I just let him lay there, and I thought maybe might be another, but the others had killed several of them, and we lost a couple of guys, and we didn't get another attack that night. So the next morning we attacked the ridges again. But I went over to this dead and I looked to see if he had any papers, opened up his wallet. There was a picture of his mother and father and a young girl, which I presume was his sister. And he only looked maybe about 17 or so. And anyway, I got my things together, and I put the pictures back in. I said, well, I didn't care for, there was nothing of information. He did have a flag in his hat, Japanese flag, but I didn't bother with that because we were going to attack the ridges again. And we did get up on top of the ridge, and once we had it, all of a sudden we were occasionally getting artillery fire, and we could have sworn it was coming from the ocean. There might have been some Navy who were naval directing a destroyer out there, their fire, and they didn't know the people on this ridge. They probably presumed it was Japanese. So we were getting low on ammunition, and they asked for a volunteer to get out and get some ammunition. I said I'd go. So I took a towel with me to put on my shoulder and went trotting down to the beach. And that's when I came across Chesty Puller's headquarters. So I sat down there, and Chesty Puller had his shirt off and, directing his hands were on his hips. And a shell came. Everybody ran and jumped down, ducked. He stood up. I still looked at him. He had his hands like this. He said, "What the hell are you guys doing?" He said, "That was a mile away." Well, it was fairly close, actually. And he was just doing his thing of being Chesty Puller. And I always remember the picture of him, no shirt, bright sun, and standing with his hips like that. So we sat there for a little while, and I said, I got to get down to the beach. And a guy come trotting by, and he had a case on his shoulder on facing this side. And the uniform didn't even look like it fit him. And everybody started looking and wondering. And he went a little past us. He turned around to look. I guess he thought, he was amazed that he got by us or something. And everybody hollered, and all these guys fired their rifles or whatever. He must have been hit 50 times. And I saw Puller still standing there with his hands like this, looking. The guys all rushing over to look at this dead. And I said, well, I just thought I'd get down to the beach. And I got a case of ammunition and started back. And when I got there, they said, now we need water. So I didn't feel like volunteering just after that. So they told us Marvin Hatton to get down and get some water. So he went down to the beach, and he came back with an empty can. And we said, oh, where's the water? He said, water's no good. They got fuel in it, and you can't drink it. He said, I took a taste, he says, like a gasoline taste. And they were pouring from 55-gallon drums, and you could take one of these 5-gallon can. Well, he put a couple of quarts in it, I guess, just to prove that there was, and you couldn't drink the stuff. So I said, Marvin, we're being hit by some artillery, and they normally fire about 3 shells. I said, so after that first one hits, and we know it's there, I said, get flat on your stomach, because they're, firing right on top of us. So a shell landed, another one, and Marvin didn't get flat on his stomach. He was on his hands and knees, and he got this shell right into his side. So you could hear him yell, and he rolled over on the side I could just barely see blood, and it was getting dark at that time. So I said to these guys, give me your bandages. I said, he's got a serious wound. And so I took my own, and I was going to wrap him put my hand, by then it was getting dark, right at my hand went right into his side. And I stuffed it all in. Then I took his and wrapped it. I pushed that in there, and then 7 or 8 other bandages I put around him, and then it was pitch dark. So we dragged Marvin up to a bomb crater and had him below ground, and then went up and formed our line. And, for about an hour, Marvin was screaming back there and yelling. He was in tremendous pain. So I told these guys, I said, look, I'm going back to get Marvin and drag him down beside me. And he needed help, and the only thing he could do was console him or something. And I often thought they should have given people some kind of a medicine, or even to give a another Marine a shot or something. I suppose they were probably afraid to let this stuff out. I don't know what they used to give them, needles to, morphine or something, I suppose. And so I said, don't anybody fire now, because I'm going to go over and get him. So I grabbed him by the collar and dragged him down the 30 feet that I was away. And I had a little depression I was in, so I put his body in, and I was on top of the ground. And all night long, he was, almost in a coma and making a lot of noise. So one of the guys, and I won't tell you his name, but he said, shut him up. He said, I'm going to come over and shoot him. I said, if you come over to shoot him, I'm going to kill you. So during the night, I was holding Marvin's hand. All of a sudden, I felt his hand relax. And I put my hand up by his face, and I didn't know what it was, a strange feeling. And I couldn't make out what it was. And I shut my eyes and slept for about an hour or so. It was daylight, and the first thing I did is jump up where Marvin was, and his face was, all these shells all over his face, these little things like this, all chewing at his flesh. I pulled one off. You can see that you'd pull the skin off, everything. So I cut one of his dog tags and opened his mouth up just a little and shut it real tight, because I didn't want him, so they could identify him. And lo and behold, he was missing in action, and I don't know why they wouldn't have found the one on his neck and the other one in his mouth. I was alone by myself that morning and that afternoon, and a plane went over, an American plane, and I thought, gosh, these guys have got carrying bombs or napalm, and so I had enough strength to go out, and I I cleared all, and I made big figures about a foot wide of Semper Fi on the ground, because I figured the Japanese were on the ridges looking down, wouldn't even know what that meant. So next time this plane came over, I saw him dip his wings, and when he got over the other side, he dropped some napalm, whether there were on the other side or some target. And he flew over a couple of times. And it was getting dark, and I had picked this spot because I had a big piece of coral that I could hide behind. And I had 13 hand grenades. I laid 12 of them on the rocks, one on my belt, the left. And I had a 30 caliber M1, and I had a carbine, and I had a 45 pistol. And I had ditched my machine gun because I couldn't carry the ammunition and a machine gun, and I thought those were better weapons. And it just got daylight, and I could hear some chattering or talking. And I woke up. I was in a little bit of a sleep, I guess. And I could tell it was Japanese, and I couldn't even see them yet. And they came around this big sort of piece of coral on a pathway. I thought it was a dried up river or something. One was pulling a machine gun cart with supplies on it, and the other one was either an officer or a non-commissioned officer with a samurai sword dragging between his legs, and looked a little comical. But so I took my M1 rifle and waited to get real close, and I shot the pulling the machine gun cart, because he had a rifle on his shoulder. I figured I'd better kill him first, because I didn't want to get in a firefight. And I shot him in the head, and he dropped dead. And then the Japanese officer, for a second or two, stood there for a minute and trying to get his scabbard out and started rushing towards me. And I didn't want to take a chance of missing him if I tried to shoot him in the head. So I shot two bullets in his stomach, and he fell down, and after yelling and screaming in Japanese, I saw his hand. He kept going like this, but he couldn't raise his arm up. I realized he had a hand grenade in his hand. So I had no water, and I had no food, but I had plenty of ammunition. So I thought, well, after he dies, I'll I'll go out and get the canteen off the fellow that shot in the head because I didn't want to bother him because he had a hand grenade. So he died within an hour or so and stopped screaming. And I went to get up, and I didn't have enough strength. And I was going to crawl, and all of a sudden I heard a tank, and I realized an American amphibious tank, and it come over a ridge off to my right. And they were several hundred feet away, and I took my T-shirt that I had wrapped my legs up. I had 3 machine gun bullets in my right leg and a bayonet through my left knee, and I waved this white dirty shirt, and I could see the tank maneuvering, and I knew that they had a 75 millimeter. They were probably going to fire on me. But luckily, one of them had a pair of binoculars, and they said, oh, that's a Marine. So they come over there, and they said, do you need any ammunition? I said, no, I don't have any water or any food. So 2 of them jumped down, and about that time, I went like this, and this fellow snapped a picture. And he said, that's the best picture I've ever taken. I didn't know what he really meant by that, but they said, you don't need water or you don't need any food. He said, you need the hospital ship. So they grabbed me by the seat of the pants and shoulder and threw me up over the tank. So I come down on my head. Good thing I had a helmet on. And they raced to the beach. They said, we got to get you out of here. He said, you're almost gone. And I would notice that my eyes were getting sort of cloudy, and I realized that I hadn't had any water. I was dehydrated, and of course, loss of blood. So they gave me these guys delivered me to this corpsman on the beach, and they put me on a cot, and they said, goodbye, good luck, and so forth. And they went off, I'm sure, to help to supply other Marines out there. So they had a barge come in, and they took me out on a barge. They lifted me up on a hoist. They strip everything off you, and they sprayed you with some kind of spray, dehydration or disinfectant or something. And then they put a little white powder, which was DDT, I guess, in your head, meet you at the door, put a robe on you, and put you to bed. And then clean you up, and the doctor came around. And down below me, they brought in this Joe Ferrara, a good friend of mine. And he had been hit by a Japanese with a samurai sword, and he couldn't grab his rifle fast enough, and he went to grab his throat, and it came down on the side with a samurai sword, and it hit him on the side. And as they walked away, I said, Joe, is that you? And he said, yeah. He said, Frank, I got to tell you this. He said, I killed this with my bare hands. He said, I crushed his head, and the helmet come off. I kept banging his head on the coral. He said, and I choked him to death. And he said, I got the guy that got me. So I heard the doctors talking over further, and I heard them say, he may not last overnight. I thought, well, it has to be him. I don't feel that bad. So then they came over, the corpsman, they said, we're going to give you something to sleep. And they gave Joe a shot first, and then they gave me a shot. And I think within 15 minutes I was gone. And this was about 3 or 4 o'clock in the afternoon that I was on the hospital ship. And I didn't wake up till the next night, till after 8 o'clock. And when I did wake up, the doctor told me I had gangrene in my leg. And anyway, first thing I did is grab for my leg, and I couldn't feel anything in my right leg, and I could feel my left leg. And I yelled to him, the corpsman. I said, you took my leg off? You never even told me? He said, no. He said, your leg's still there. We took you down and gave you, we operated on you and gave you local anesthesia. He said, your leg's so numb, you don't even feel it. You don't even know you got a leg. So it calmed me down a little. And anyway, I said, what happened to Joe down below me? He said, well, I don't know who Joe was, but he said, but They buried him at sea last night.